I had an affair with a married man that resulted in an unexpected pregnancy. Did you know that nearly 30% of people admit to cheating in a relationship? But those are just the ones willing to come clean. Imagine how many more keep it secret, living double lives, caught between guilt and desire. Infidelity is often swept under the rug, but what happens when a hidden affair has real, life-altering consequences? Think about it. What would you do if you found out you were pregnant from an affair? Not just any affair, but with someone who's already married, someone who has built their life around another person. This story is about one of those moments. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm diving into a story that's so personal, I've honestly kept it tucked away for a long time. There are some things in life that just weigh too heavily on your heart to share right away, and this is one of them. But sometimes, telling your story can help others going through similar struggles. Maybe someone watching right now is dealing with the same thing, or maybe sharing my truth can offer insight into something so complicated and emotional that we don't even talk about it in our day-to-day lives. It's a story about the time I had an affair with a married man. And if that wasn't complicated enough, I ended up pregnant. Yeah, you heard that right. Pregnant from an affair. I know it sounds like something out of a soap opera or a bad tabloid headline, but trust me, it's real life. And real life, as we all know, can be much more unexpected, painful, and raw than any fiction. So, let me take you back to where it all began. It started like many stories do, innocent enough. I wasn't out looking for an affair. I wasn't some homewrecker waiting in the wings. But, as they say, sometimes we end up in situations we don't plan. I met him through mutual friends. At first, we were just acquaintances, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was this undeniable connection, something that felt electric. You know that feeling, when there's this tension between you and someone else that's almost impossible to ignore? It was like that. Of course, I knew he was married. He wasn't trying to hide that. But it started off as something casual. We'd bump into each other at gatherings, and our conversations were harmless, at least at first. But soon things shifted. It wasn't just polite small talk anymore. We started texting, then meeting up outside of social events, and before I knew it, I was in the middle of something that was much bigger than either of us had anticipated. I didn't think much about the consequences at the time. I was caught up in the excitement, the thrill of something forbidden. But then, reality hit hard. Everything changed the moment I started feeling sick. At first, I thought it was just stress. I was carrying around this huge secret after all. But when the nausea didn't go away, I had this sinking feeling that something was off. So I did what anyone would do. I took a pregnancy test. I'll never forget that moment. The few minutes waiting for the result felt like hours. And then, there it was, 2 lines. I remember just staring at the test, my mind spinning. Pregnant. How could this even be happening? My first reaction was denial. There's no way this is real, I thought. But deep down, I knew it was. And in that moment, I realized that everything had changed. It wasn't just about me anymore. I was now faced with the reality of potentially bringing a child into a world that was already so complicated, so messy, and so far from what I ever imagined for myself. So, let's get into the heart of it. The affair itself started so casually, almost like a side note in my life at the time. We met through mutual friends, nothing scandalous or extraordinary at first. There was a spark, sure, but I didn't think it would ever lead anywhere. It felt innocent, like a harmless flirtation. I never intended for it to evolve into anything serious. But, as is often the case with these things, one small step after another, and suddenly I found myself in the middle of something I couldn't control. At the beginning, it was all fun and excitement. We'd meet in secret, text each other late at night, share inside jokes that only we understood. For a while, it felt like a game, something thrilling that broke the monotony of my regular life. He was charming, attentive, and always made me feel like I was the only person in the room. I told myself it wasn't serious, that we were just enjoying each other's company, and that it would eventually fade away. But as time went on, I started to realize the weight of what I was doing. This wasn't just a fling anymore. I had gotten emotionally invested, even though I knew from the start that there were lines that shouldn't be crossed. He had a wife, a family, and a whole life outside of what we were sharing. The guilt started creeping in, slowly at first, like a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I'd go to bed at night thinking about his wife, wondering if she suspected anything, if she knew her husband was slipping away. The shame was overwhelming, but I still couldn't stop. Then, out of nowhere, life threw me the biggest curveball of all. I started feeling sick. At first, I thought it was just stress, the pressure of living a double life, the fear of being found out. But the nausea wouldn't go away. I was tired all the time, and I just had this gut feeling that something was wrong. So I decided to take a pregnancy test, just to rule it out. That moment when I saw those 2 lines, it was like my entire world shifted in an instant. Suddenly, everything I had been trying to ignore, all the consequences I had been pushing to the side, came crashing down on me. I was pregnant, and not just with any child, with his child. A married man's child. I was in shock. I remember just standing there in my bathroom, staring at the test, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this be happening? How had I let things get this far? I was completely overwhelmed. In that moment, it felt like my life was falling apart. I wasn't just dealing with the emotional fallout of the affair anymore. I was now facing a decision that would impact the rest of my life. The guilt, the fear, the confusion, they all hit me like a ton of bricks. What would I do? How would I tell him? And more importantly, what about his wife? Would I have to tell her too? My mind was racing with a million questions, and I didn't have answers to any of them. I felt so alone in that moment. There was no one I could turn to. Who would understand? Who could I trust with this secret? I couldn't tell my family or friends. They would judge me, or worse, they would pity me. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, and no matter what I did, there was no easy way out. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about this child, an innocent life caught in the middle of a situation that had spiraled out of control. And then there was the question of responsibility. What kind of life could I offer this baby? What kind of future could we have, knowing that the father was married and committed to another family? Would this child grow up knowing the truth, or would I have to live with the burden of secrecy for the rest of my life? The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. The weight of it all was suffocating. I was drowning in the reality of my situation, and I had no idea how to move forward. But the hardest part was telling him. I'll never forget the look on his face when I told him I was pregnant. At first he was supportive, as if he was trying to process the news and figure out what to do next. But as the reality of the situation set in, I could see the fear in his eyes. This wasn't just a secret affair anymore. This was something real, something that would change his life forever. He had a wife, a family, a life that didn't include me, and now he was faced with the possibility of a child outside of his marriage. Over the next few days, I noticed him pulling away. He wasn't as responsive to my messages, and when we did talk, it was brief and tense. It was clear that he was struggling to reconcile the situation. He didn't know what to do either, and the uncertainty was eating away at both of us. I couldn't help but feel like I was losing him, like the affair that had once felt so intoxicating was now crumbling under the weight of reality. And then there was the societal stigma. I couldn't help but think about what people would say if they found out. Being the other woman is one thing, but being the other woman who got pregnant, that's a whole new level of shame. I felt like I was carrying this scarlet letter, something that marked me as a homewrecker, a villain in someone else's story. I knew people wouldn't understand, that they would judge me without knowing the full truth. And that thought terrified me. As I navigated through the storm of emotions that came with the affair, I couldn't help but reflect on how I had gotten here. It was strange. There were moments where everything felt so surreal, like I was watching someone else live my life. I remember sitting across from him at dinner, laughing, sharing stories, and feeling this undeniable connection. There were times when I genuinely felt like we had something special, something that went beyond the secrecy of our situation. It was easy to forget, in those stolen moments, that what we were doing was wrong. It was easy to convince myself that I deserved to be happy, even if that happiness came at a cost. But, of course, reality always has a way of crashing in. Every time we parted ways, I'd feel the weight of what we were doing settle back in. There was always this knowing sense of guilt that followed me around, a reminder that no matter how much I tried to justify my actions, I was the other woman. I was the one complicating someone else's life. And the truth was, I wasn't just hurting his wife, I was hurting myself too. Every time I walked away from him, there was this emptiness that lingered, like I was chasing something I could never fully have. And then there was his reaction. When I told him about the pregnancy, I could see the conflict written all over his face. At first, he was supportive. He assured me that we would figure it out, that we'd find a way to deal with the situation. But as the days passed, it became clear that he was struggling. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and the carefree attitude we once had during the affair was replaced by a tension that neither of us knew how to handle. He had a wife, a family, a life that didn't include me or this baby. And while he tried to put on a brave face, I could see the fear in his eyes. What would this mean for him? How would his wife react as she found out? Would his entire life unravel because of this one decision? These were questions I knew he was asking himself, but they were also questions I couldn't answer for him. All I knew was that I was now left to figure out what to do, and I didn't know where to start. I also began to reflect on my own feelings during the affair. There were moments when I felt genuine happiness with him, moments of laughter, connection, and yes, even love. But those moments were always overshadowed by the knowledge that what we were doing was wrong. There was always this sense of danger, of secrecy, that loomed over everything. We could never be fully open about our relationship. We couldn't go out to dinner without worrying about being seen, couldn't text each other without being careful about who might see our messages. And while part of me thrived on that excitement, another part of me was suffocating under the weight of it all. I remember one evening in particular. We had spent the day together, and for a few hours, everything felt perfect. But as I was leaving, I noticed the way his expression changed. It was subtle, but it was there. This shift in his demeanor, like he was pulling back from me, retreating into the life he had outside of us. I realized then that no matter how close we felt in those moments, I would always be on the outside. I would never fully be a part of his world, because he already had a life that I wasn't meant to disrupt. I was a temporary escape for him, and that realization hurt more than I was willing to admit at the time. Then came the societal stigma. This was something that weighed heavily on me, even if I didn't talk about it much at the time. Being the other woman is one thing, but being the other woman who gets pregnant, that's an entirely different level of judgment. I knew people wouldn't understand the full complexity of what had happened. They would see me as the villain in this story, the homewrecker who ruined someone else's marriage. I was sure that if word got out, I would be branded with that scarlet letter, and no one would care to hear my side of the story. I didn't just fear the judgment of people I knew. I feared how society as a whole would perceive me. There's an expectation, an unspoken rule, that women in my position are supposed to know better. We're supposed to have control over our emotions, to not let ourselves get caught up in affairs with married men. And when we do, we're seen as careless, immoral, even cruel. It was a weight I carried with me everywhere I went, even when no one else knew the truth. But there were also moments of deep reflection. I started to think about why I had gotten into this affair in the first place. Was it just the excitement, the thrill of doing something forbidden? Or was it something deeper, something about the way he made me feel seen, appreciated, even loved? I started to realize that this wasn't just about him. It was about me, and the things I was searching for in my own life that I hadn't been able to find. This affair wasn't just a mistake. It was a symptom of something bigger, something that had been missing in my life for a long time. And while I wrestled with all these emotions, I also had to deal with the practical realities. The pregnancy was a constant reminder that things were no longer just about me. I wasn't just thinking about my own feelings anymore. I was thinking about this baby and what kind of life I could offer it. Could I raise a child knowing that their father wasn't fully present in their life? Could I handle the responsibility of being a single mother, or would I have to turn to him for help, knowing that it would only complicate things further? These were the thoughts that kept me up at night. There was no easy answer, no simple solution, and as much as I wanted to run away from the situation, I knew that I couldn't. The reality was, I had to face the consequences of my actions. I had to decide what was best for me and for this child, even if it meant making some of the hardest choices of my life. The moment I discovered I was pregnant was like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss, with no idea what would happen if I took the next step. I knew that everything was about to change. It was a moment of total clarity, and at the same time, overwhelming confusion. I found myself sitting alone in my bedroom, holding the positive pregnancy test, my mind racing in a million different directions. What was I supposed to do? How could I have been so reckless? It felt like time stood still. I was paralyzed by the enormity of the situation. This wasn't just a minor consequence of an affair, it was life-changing. I was going to be responsible for another human being, a child who hadn't asked to be brought into this complicated, messy world. I remember feeling a profound sense of responsibility settle over me, like a heavy blanket. My life, my choices, weren't just about me anymore. They were about this baby. The gravity of it all hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't ready to be a mother, not like this. I hadn't planned for it. I hadn't prepared for it. The circumstances were far from ideal. I was entangled in an affair with a married man, a situation that was already fraught with guilt and secrecy. And now I was faced with the decision of whether to keep the baby, whether to bring a child into a world where their father wasn't fully available, where their existence would be tied to a secret that could destroy lives. In that moment, I felt completely alone. I couldn't turn to anyone for advice. Who could I tell? Who would understand? My family would be shocked, my friends would judge me, and the man who should have been the one to support me was pulling away, consumed by his own fear and guilt. It was just me, and the weight of the decision I had to make. I spent days going back and forth in my mind. Should I keep the baby? Should I terminate the pregnancy? The decision was agonizing. On one hand, I couldn't imagine bringing a child into such a complicated and unstable situation. On the other hand, the idea of not going through with the pregnancy filled me with a sense of loss I couldn't fully understand. I had always imagined that when I became a mother, it would be under completely different circumstances. But now, here I was, and nothing about this situation was what I had planned. I found myself staring at the ceiling late at night, unable to sleep, my mind running through every possible scenario. If I had the baby, what kind of life could I provide? Would I be a single mother, struggling to raise a child on my own? Could I rely on him to be there, or would he eventually disappear, leaving me to shoulder the responsibility alone? And if I didn't go through with the pregnancy, would I regret it for the rest of my life? There was no easy answer, no clear path forward. I had to dig deep and confront the reality of the situation. I had to face the fact that I was in this position because of the choices I had made, and now I had to take responsibility for those choices. But how do you make a decision like that? How do you decide the future of another life, knowing that no matter what you choose, there will be consequences? I remember one particular moment, sitting in my room, staring at the wall, tears streaming down my face. The weight of the decision was suffocating. I felt trapped, like there was no way out of this without someone getting hurt. If I kept the baby, I would be forever tied to a man who wasn't fully mine, a man who had a life outside of me, a man who might not be there for us in the way I needed him to be. And if I didn't, I would have to live with the knowledge that I had made a decision to end a potential life. In the end, the decision wasn't just about whether or not to keep the baby. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about facing the consequences of my actions head-on and taking responsibility for the path I had walked. And while it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, it was also a moment of empowerment. I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with the strength I had found in myself through this journey. The emotional weight of the decision grew heavier with every passing day. It felt like I was living in a haze, every moment dominated by thoughts of the future, of this child, of the life I was about to bring into the world or not. I went back and forth 1,000 times in my mind, running through every possible outcome. There were times when I convinced myself that everything would somehow work out, that I could find a way to raise this child even without his full support. But then, just as quickly, doubts would flood back in, and I would wonder if I was setting myself up for a life of hardship. The questions swirled endlessly. How could I explain this to my family? They didn't even know about the affair. I had kept it hidden for so long, and now I was about to reveal not just the affair, but also that I was pregnant. I imagined their reactions: shock, disappointment, maybe even anger. Would they still support me? Would they be able to look past my mistakes and stand by me in this difficult time? These questions weighed heavily on me because I knew that once I told them, everything would change. My relationship with them would never be the same. And then there were the practicalities. Could I really handle being a single mother? I would be raising a child with no certainty about the father's involvement. Sure, he had said he would be there, but his words felt increasingly empty as the days went by and his actions didn't match up. I pictured myself struggling to balance work, parenting, and the overwhelming pressure of doing it all on my own. It was daunting, terrifying even. But then, on the flip side, the idea of not going through with the pregnancy filled me with a profound sense of guilt and sorrow. I had never imagined myself in this position, having to make such a decision about life and death. There were moments when I could almost feel the life growing inside me, and that feeling would stir emotions I didn't expect. There was a connection, even though the circumstances were far from ideal, and that connection made the decision even harder. The days blurred together in a fog of indecision. Every time I thought I had made up my mind, something would shift. Either my emotions, his behavior, or my thoughts about the future, and I'd find myself back at square one, questioning everything all over again. The uncertainty was suffocating, and it felt like there was no right answer, no clear path forward. No matter what I chose, there would be consequences, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face any of them. In the end, I realized that this decision was about more than just me, more than just the baby. It was about taking responsibility for the life I had created and finding a way to move forward with integrity. I knew that I couldn't undo the past, but I could make a choice about the future that felt right to me, even if it wasn't easy. And with that realization came a small sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that made everything feel okay, but it was the kind of peace that comes from knowing that, no matter how hard the road ahead might be, I was making the best decision I could with the information I had. As I look back on that chapter of my life, I realize just how much it has shaped me. I'm not the same person I was before the affair, before the pregnancy, before the whirlwind of emotions and difficult choices that followed. I've changed, not just because of the circumstances, but because of the lessons those circumstances taught me. One of the biggest lessons I learned was about forgiveness, forgiving myself for the mistakes I made, and learning how to let go of the shame and guilt that came with those mistakes. I think that's something we don't talk about enough, how hard it is to forgive ourselves. It's easy to carry the weight of regret, to replay the decisions we wish we could change over and over in our minds. But at some point, we have to come to terms with the fact that we are human, that we make mistakes, and that those mistakes don't define us. What defines us is how we move forward, how we choose to live our lives in the wake of those mistakes. This experience also taught me a lot about relationships, not just romantic relationships, but relationships with family and friends as well. I had to have some really difficult conversations, not just with him, but with the people closest to me. I had to be honest about the choices I had made and accept that not everyone would understand or agree with them. But what surprised me was the amount of support I received once I was open about what I was going through. Yes, there were moments of judgment, and yes, some relationships changed, but others grew stronger because of the honesty and vulnerability I shared. It also gave me a new perspective on love and trust. What I had with him wasn't real love. It was a fantasy built on secrecy and deception. Real love, I've come to realize, is built on trust, transparency, and mutual respect. And while this experience shook my trust in others, it also helped me to build trust in myself. I learned to trust my own instincts, to listen to my own needs, and to make decisions that aligned with my values, even when they were hard. Perhaps the most important lesson I learned is that life is unpredictable. We can make plans, we can have expectations, but life will throw us curveballs when we least expect it. And while we can't always control what happens to us, we can control how we respond. It's in those responses that we find our strength, our resilience, and our capacity to grow. Now, I want to turn it over to you. Have you ever found yourself in a situation that felt impossible to navigate? A moment where you had to make a tough decision that would impact not just your life, but the lives of others as well? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, and your experiences. Please share them in the comments below. I believe our stories, no matter how different, can create a space for support and understanding, and who knows, your story could help someone else going through a similar struggle. If this story resonated with you or gave you something to think about, make sure to check out my other videos where I share more personal stories, challenges, and lessons I've learned along the way. I believe in keeping it real here, and this channel is all about diving into the tough stuff, sharing personal growth, and supporting each other as we navigate life's ups and downs. Finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future videos. By subscribing, you're joining a community that's here to talk about the real things, to listen without judgment, and to learn from one another. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of this journey with me. I'll see you in the next video.